Hi, welcome to this paint along, which is exclusively for my newsletter followers. I'm going to show you how to create a winter sky, a wintry foreground, a middle ground using only 3 watercolors, and then we're going to do a silhouette of a winter tree using 2 different pens. For this technique, working with dry brush, I'm keeping the materials really simple. I'm going to work with a pencil, a watercolor brush. I like these round brushes, size 6, but any size that you have will work. I have my 2 pens that I'm going to work with. I want them one to be thick and the other to be thin. This happens to be a graphic pen number 1, but any thicker pen will do, and any very thin pen. This is a Micron 005. I have my watercolor set ready. I'm only going to be working with 3 colors, and I can find those colors quickly because I've created a swatch of my colors. And then I encourage you to make sure that you're working with a good quality watercolor paper. This is a 5x7 cold press, which means there is a very light texture to this, and it's a nice thickness, which is 140 pounds. Doesn't really matter that much in terms of the thickness. You can also work on a 90 pound. This is also a cold press. This is about 6x9, this is 5x7, and you can choose whatever size is more comfortable. I have my clean water spray bottle, which is important, and then always a bunch of paper towels nearby to dry my brush on or to blot up if I have a blob that's shown up somewhere. So my 3 colors are going to be Payne's Gray, Yellow Ochre, and Magenta. So the first thing I'm doing is activating my Payne's Gray, my Yellow Ochre, and Magenta. And again, I can find them quickly because of my swatches. Go ahead and get those 3 colors activated, and then with your wet brush, go ahead and put a small swatch down. There's my Payne's Gray. I'm cleaning my brush in between. Here's my Yellow Ochre. And Magenta. And now what's fun is let's see what happens when we mix those colors together. So here's my mixing area. I'm going to take some Payne's Gray and create a little bubble there. And I'm going to take some Yellow Ochre and create a bubble here. And I was once taught that the best way to mix colors is to actually pull them into the center so that you can still maintain the pure color and just see, you can see how much Payne's Gray is coming in here, so it's getting darker. This is Yellow Ochre is pulling in over here. And so I can adjust my mix the way I'd like to. So here's my Payne's Gray and Yellow Ochre. I think I want to add a little bit more Yellow Ochre to that. And you could see what I'm getting is almost a gray-green, unless the highlights are, there we go. You can see that it's almost a gray-green, but it's very wintry looking. And then I'm going to mix my Payne's Gray with Magenta. And I pull the 2 colors over. Oh, look at that. I'm getting almost a purple because there's a lot of blue in Payne's Gray. So I'm getting a really pretty purple. If I mix more Payne's Gray, I can go quite a bit darker with just a little magenta, or if I use a lot more magenta with just a little bit, I get a lavender color. So I get that color variation. And the final mixing is the magenta with the yellow ochre. And you can see that that's going to give me a more interesting orange color. And of course I can add a lot more Payne's gray to that and go almost a rose. Or I can add a lot more yellow ochre and get almost a burnt orange. So you can see those color variations. So what's super fun about this paint along is just these three colors are going to make everything to indicate our winter scene. So to get started, I have a 6x9 piece of paper. I've put a pencil line about an inch in, or excuse me, about a ½ inch in, doesn't have to be measured by any means, and then coming across just to get a more portrait format here without using the whole space. And I'm going to go up about 1/3 and put a very light line in there to indicate the horizon. So this is going to be my area for the winter sky. I wet my brush, grab some Payne's gray, and for the dry brush technique, I'm going to set my brush down as flat as possible and just let it start skipping across the page. And I'm going to have to go back and refill my brush a lot. And as I do that, I'm going to get some areas with that harsh dark line there. I want to soften that a little bit. And I turn my brush around so that the paint comes out and lays down on the paper. Now I like this textured dry brush effect, so I'm not going to do much more than just sort of soften that, and I end it right there at the horizon line. That's pretty much it for the sky. I'm going to let that dry and do the bottom. Now you can speed dry if you are in the mood to do the entire painting at the same time I'm doing it. Pause the video and go use a hairdryer to speed dry what you've just painted. Now we're going to put in the ground, and for this I want to pull a very, very pale amount of this almost pink lavender color that I mixed up using the magenta with a little bit of Payne's gray. I'm adding a lot of water to it because I want it to be incredibly pale. And now I'm going to dry brush with that along the bottom. But notice that I'm not getting down too much paint. I'm purposely leaving a fair amount of white, that's the snow, and I'm just kind of rubbing my brush against it, and I hope you can see. So I went sort of at a diagonal here, I went horizontally across there, and this is going to be the snow, and where the purple pink is will be the shadows, and we're going to add to that now some of the yellow ochre color here. But it's really a loose application with your brush on the side. So I'm cleaning my brush, and now I want to create a pathway for my eye to follow. So I'm going to kind of zigzag this, and I'm going to come from over here and just very lightly, do you see how I'm just going right to left, just horizontally with my paintbrush, just to get some streaks in here as if there is some dirt showing. And yours is not going to be exactly like this. Mine, if I did it over and over again, never would be the same either. The point is to just have sort of a diagonal zigzag, like there's a Z right there with a little extra. Using your combination yellow ochre, Payne's gray, and maybe a dab of magenta just to get a sandy color in there. Now for the section that separates the sky from the ground, that's going to look like winter bushes, and we need a little separation here. So I'm going to mix up and use almost all three colors mixed together, because that's going to give me a very rich looking brown. And I'm going to add that brown irregularly along the horizon line. So I want that to be kind of jumpy and not at all ending at the top in the same way. So you can see it there. As I create this lineup of trees and bushes, I'm doing it fairly irregularly. And I'm definitely, because of the transparency of this watercolor, I'm going to have to do a few layers. So this is going to have to dry, and I'll have to do a second layer over it. But the main concept is to see how irregular the shapes are on top. Let me grab a little yellow ochre and see what happens when I add. There we go. Now you can probably see that a little better. It's mixing with the wet Paynes gray and magenta and creating almost a winter green brown look. So play with whatever colors you want. I've got that on there. I might want to brighten that up a little bit. Now just throw on some magenta on top, just in little areas, because the eye will blend that in too. So that's created a nicer, darker value. It's kind of fun because it's like looking at bushes in the background that are that kind of reddish brown in the winter. Now all of this has to be dried up. So I'm going to go speed dry it with my hairdryer. Now I'm going to add the magic to pull this whole picture together. I want to lightly indicate where the trunk of the silhouette winter tree is going to be, and I encourage you to not put the tree right smack in the middle. It'll just be more visually interesting if you're off to the side a little bit. So the first consideration is to get your tree off to the right or the left side a little bit, and then look for an area. One area might be right here, where the sand pathway is around an area of ground that might be sticking up, or I could put my tree right here because it's the same thing. Just because I tend to lean to the right, I'm going to start my tree here and draw vertical lines going over all my watercolor. And then I've been out wandering in my own neighborhood and observing, and I really encourage you to do this. Go outside and take some pictures of some silhouette of winter trees near you if you happen to be in a winter climate. And so I'm just indicating where the branches might be, and they really vary quite a bit, but I'm coming up off of the trunk of this tree and going clear to the top. Now I'm going to fill that in. It's a very light sketch with my pencil, just giving me the general, basically, skeleton or scaffolding of the tree. Now I'm just going to fill it in. And as I do that, watch that at the bottom, I don't come straight across. I want this bottom to be a little uneven, as if the snow has created an uneven area on the very base of that tree. And I'm basically just coloring this in now with my nice thick black pen. And it's okay if your pen is not waterproof. I happen to like these Microns because they are waterproof. But if you don't have one, if you have a flare or something else like that, just use what you have on hand. And so some of these branches are slightly irregular and might be a little thicker in areas. So I'm going to just fill in the big branches, the thick branches, with my pen before adding the rest of the smaller branches. So I have my thick branches indicated. Now I'm taking my thin pen, and this is where it's just super fun, and you just get to put down lots of small lines. And again, I encourage you to go outside and observe the way these branches go all over the place. And I have to scrub that in a little bit. My sky is a bit darker than on my original painting, so I'm kind of doing a little scribbling over them so that they'll show up a little better. But I'm going every which way with my branch. Now, as you're doing your branches, keep in mind that variation is the key. And some areas you might want to put a little extra thickness on at the end of the branch. That'll just draw the eye into that area. In other areas, you might want to go a variety of directions. So some might be going to the right, the left, some might be going straight. And the other thing is, you could also overlap, and don't forget to vary your size. So some of these little branches are going to be really short and some are going to be long. So variation is the key to make that looking more and more realistic. So I'm just adding a few dark areas, a little thicker area on the edge of some of these branches, just to give it that sort of windblown look. Now I'm going to come into this bush lineup right here and do the same thing, only with pretty much straight bushy lines to indicate that this is some kind of lineup, as I said. And I want it to be a little darker down at the bottom. So I'm kind of scrubbing that irregularly with my pen. And it's okay if you come up out of the painted area. Totally fine. This is a loose rendition. I never go for exact or perfection or measuring anything. I just have so much fun creating these loose lines. And I do want to be sure that I'm darkening the bottom and then just putting these straight lines every which way, kind of angled, all along this line here that you had painted with a slightly different color. These lines are just going to add texture and give your eye something to look at to sort of understand that that's part of this forest or outdoor scene. And you can see why I've chosen a slightly smaller format, because now I'm almost done just by making these straight lines or hatch marks, whatever. And if you want, you can do these hatch marks and then go back in with your thicker pen and darken up like tiny little breadcrumbs just in this area, just to give it a little more oomph. There we go. And so I've darkened it up there. Now, the last thing I want to do is to create a little more depth and texture on the snow. And can you see here, these are kind of purpley marks, and the sandy area is a little bit more rich. So now I'm going to go back to my paints and mix just a little bit thicker purple, and for that I used the magenta and the Paynes gray. So I'm going to mix that together, just get a slightly thicker purple, and I'm going to just indicate in the direction of my line. So I want this to look like it's going up. Oops, that's a bit dark. This is why I have paper towels. I can blot that up and add just a little bit more water to that. There we go. Okay, so I'm coming up and I'm kind of coming over, and over here I might come up. So these are the shadows that are all over the snow. And in this area I might come up a little bit, just diagonally, indicating that the ground comes up and over. And then here I'm just going to put a bunch of little blobbies just for some more texture, and some texture down in the front. I have not filled the area. I just added my purples in a directional way. I'm also going to add a little bit of purple mixed with some of this yellow ochre, because I want this sand, the part that's like the pathway, to be a little more textured. I don't want that to be a flat color, just a simple single color. So I'm just going back, and you'll notice that a lot of times when I'm painting, I just swipe my brush right to left. It's a very easy movement, I find. And if I just barely touch the surface, it gives me the line that I want. It's sort of gentle painting, which would be a new term. Gentle painting, right there. Maybe Bob Ross used that. Okay, I need to go dry that up, and then we put our final bits of ink to indicate what the ground looks like. Now for the final touch, this is all dry. I'm going to come in and define some of the little hills and pathway with my pen, just to add a little more detail. So here's a section that's going up. So I'm just going to maybe put a couple of lines here just to tell the eye that that's going up. And my pathway, where the snow meets the brown part, I'm going to darken that and just kind of pull out some lines so it's uneven. I always want to stay away from any kind of outline. Do you see how that's already gaining some definition? And so here's the section where the brown meets the white. So I'm going to, in just a few areas, I'm just going to pull some texture out, make that a little darker, and maybe some dark lines, very much like what I did with my paintbrush. I'm just running my hand right to left so that I get that sort of gentle horizontal line thing going on, and that's telling the viewer that this is the flat path near the hill. So for the hill, I want some diagonal lines, just indicating that that's the hill. And maybe I'll throw a couple of more texture lines in there just to indicate that there's some lumpiness, if you will, to this snow. So I've got some little bloops and lines showing the lumpiness and the irregularity of the snow. And every now and then, like, how about in here I put a little bush, a little bigger, making the top a little bit thicker. And it's important to overlap, so you can see where I've just decided I'm going to add a couple of bushes or weedy kind of things, straw, whatever, coming out of what might be a hole in the snow. And I'm overlapping, I'm purposely coming up over that section there. And here's my path, so I want to define that again. And there you go. Now, you've got this in your sketchbook, or you just want to look at it as a more finished piece. Here's a little magical trick. Take some black masking tape and create your frame. And voila, my winter scene. Dry brush sky, dry brush snow, 3 colors, 2 pens, a black frame, and a whole lot of fun. I hope you've enjoyed it. Please subscribe to my videos if you like this one. I've got a lot of free content on YouTube, and I would love to see your work. I hope you'll share it with me.